One parliamentary member that is against changing the Qantas Sales Act, which he says basically means selling Qantas to a foreign corporation. And joining us live from the Australian capital, Canberra, this morning, Kelvin Thomson, federal Labor member for Parliament. And, Kelvin, despite the fact that you're looking at some bleeding losses, cutting 5,000 jobs, do you really think it's, we shouldn't be changing the Qantas Sales Act to maybe give some sort of help that the government doesn't have the guarantee, by the way, to the flying kangaroo?
Good afternoon, Susan. I think it's very grim news for a lot of Australian workers, including workers in my electorate who will be impacted on with Qantas proposing to shed 5,000 jobs over just a 3-year period. And it comes off the back of some very serious job losses in prospect at Ford, at Holden, at Toyota and at Alcoa, all of which will affect workers in Melbourne and beyond throughout Victoria. But I certainly don't think that that constitutes justification for changing the Qantas Sales Act, because if you do that, that amounts to selling Qantas to a foreign corporation, and that will mean that we lose it. It no longer is Australian and it no longer is ours. So things that we have in there as protections in that Act, like Qantas's head office must be in Australia, its base of organisation and maintenance and the like must be in Australia, that the directors, 2/3 of them must be Australian. All of those things would be at risk if you were to amend the Sales Act and sell it off to a foreign corporation. In any event, a lot of aviation is based around agreements between governments, and we have a range of aviation agreements which, if Qantas were to be sold, would be impacted on by that. Furthermore, I think you would see losses to rural and regional areas. There's no doubt that the service being provided would be damaged if you were to sell it.
Mr. Thomson, so what's the alternative then? Do you expect the government to guarantee some of Qantas' debt, or do you expect the air carrier to continue bleeding losses and cutting more jobs?
Well, Qantas has announced a range of measures today which are designed to repair its budgetary position. But I think that we need to be willing to consider whatever proposals they come forward with. They're not simple and straightforward, so if you want to talk about debt guarantees and the like, to give a debt guarantee to one airline but not to others would clearly be controversial, and Virgin and Rex have already expressed opinions about that. But I think we do need to be willing to consider proposals that Qantas puts forward. We are very concerned to support Australian jobs, and Qantas, notwithstanding the 5,000 jobs that are now at risk, employs many Australians, and we want to see that continue into the future.
Mr. Thomson, it's Bernie joining Susan with you on the program here. This story has been repeated in rapid-fire succession too many times, too fast. It's not just about Qantas, it's not just about Toyota, it's not just about Holden, but there is this overwhelming debate about the competitiveness of Australia. I mean, from the tone of it, you're sticking to the ALP line. Doesn't the Labour Party in Australia need to rethink its advocacy of keeping jobs at home in this global environment, because so many parts of your economy are going away and aren't going to come back?
But the very point that you make about Ford and Holden and Toyota is relevant, because where those companies are overseas owned and controlled, they made decisions that they were no longer interested in manufacturing in Australia. And yes, that's having an adverse effect on Australian workers. And I think if you see Qantas being sold to a foreign corporation, then we lose it, and you're at risk of exactly the same sort of outcomes. Yes, I am concerned of the stories of manufacturing losses in Australia, and the fact that we are not able to compete in the way that we have been in the past. We've got unemployment up at 6%. There is a risk that it will continue to increase. But the solution to that relies on high skills, high education, and doing the things that we are capable of doing best.
Hi, Mr. Thomson. It's Matt in Sydney joining in as well. I mean, we get the iconic nature of the airline and the fact that it was once a government-owned entity. It was privatised back in the mid-90s. And we understand why there are protections in that Qantas Sales Act to, of course, protect workers' rights in Australia and also maintain the identity of the airline. But Virgin Australia is free to have whoever it wants on its share register. Why should it get special treatment and Qantas, as the airline says, have one hand tied behind its back? And when I say special treatment, it's not even special treatment, it's just the way the market works.
Yeah, but most of the largest airlines in the world are in fact government owned or controlled or subsidised in some way. So if Qantas were to be sold to a foreign corporation, there's a fair chance that you would end up with foreign government ownership at the back of that. I think that countries around the world do seek to have a national carrier. Even countries as small in size as Brunei have a national carrier, and I think they do that for good reasons. That it's in the public interest, it's in the national security interest to have that, and if we lose that will have a very adverse effect on rural and regional Australia. Qantas is part of our heritage, and it's also been a key promoter of Australian tourism. When people see that flying kangaroo, they think about Australia, and that has worked very effectively in promoting Australian tourism. And I think if you amend the Sales Act, you put all those things up for grabs and at risk.
Yeah, okay, Mr. Thomson, one more quick question for you, because there are concerns there could be more job losses coming down the pipeline from Qantas in the future. But we spoke to a union head this morning, and she told us there was no preliminary announcement to the unions. They didn't tell them in advance that we are cutting 5,000 jobs. That was something spectacular that we heard this morning. How do you feel about that?
I don't think that's the right way to do business, and I think a lot of people have been asking questions about the way in which Qantas management has done business. There was a spectacular example you might be aware of in late 2011 where the Qantas management grounded the Qantas airline off its own bat as preemptive industrial action. That cost the company some $70 million directly in terms of the grounding, and a further $56 million by way of lost customer loyalty. So I think those companies that consult extensively with their workforce and work cooperatively with them are the ones that are most successful.
Mr. Thomson, we do appreciate your time, and best for you and your country, obviously, at these trying times. Kelvin Thomson, Federal Member of Parliament from the ALP for Wills in the state of Victoria. You know, Sue, Steve, one of our senior producers, points out he's